All right, let's jump right in. This deep dive on balanced modulation and cognitive coherence was actually requested by Sachin Karnik, who's a presenter and researcher with the Angel Wing LLC. And it gets into a pretty wild idea. What if your mind isn't just a thinker, but a receiver, like an organic radio constantly tuning into the frequency of reality itself? It's a fascinating concept, and today we're going to explore how this one simple analogy can completely change the way we think about thinking.
So let's really lean into this question for a second. Just imagine your mind isn't just, generating thoughts out of thin air. Instead, what if it's a highly sophisticated receiver? This would mean the reality you experience, your thoughts, your feelings, your entire world, is basically just the station you happen to be tuned into at any given moment. That one idea is the key to everything we're about to unpack.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. We're going to use this radio analogy as our guide the whole way through. First, we'll explore how our mind actually tunes in to consciousness. Then, we'll talk about what a perfectly clear, coherent signal feels like. And, of course, what happens when we get lost in the mental static of distortion. And, maybe most importantly, we'll map out how to find that clear, powerful frequency once again.
So, let's really nail down this core concept, the mind as a radio receiver. And look, this isn't just some poetic metaphor. It's meant to be a functional model for understanding how we process the very fabric of reality on a deep, energetic level.
And you know what? The analogy maps out surprisingly well. Think of the physical radio box. That's our cognitive faculty, the part of us that's built to receive. The specific stations, like 98.7 FM. The source calls those informational frequencies. These unique vibrations that literally shape our perception. And the radio's internal decoder? Well, that's our mind's incredible power of modulation, which takes the raw, invisible energy of existence and translates it into the thoughts, feelings, and sensations that make up our world.
Okay, so if our mind is the receiver, what exactly is it tuning into and what's powering the whole thing? This question takes us right into the fundamental mechanics of consciousness itself and a pretty radical new way of defining cognition. The source defines cognition as the interpretive frequency of consciousness. Now, just let that sink in for a minute. In other words, thinking isn't just something we do, it's a specific vibration our awareness adopts to make sense of the world. It's the active process that turns the raw, chaotic data of experience into the coherent story of our life. It's pretty profound when you think about it that way.
So here's the crucial takeaway. You can think of cognition as a resonant field. You know how a magnetic field can organize a bunch of loose iron filings into a beautiful, intricate pattern? Well, our cognitive field does the same thing. It structures the raw energy of consciousness into our own personal subjective reality. The frequency you're on, it literally determines the reality you get.
So how does this shaping process work? It's called modulation. This is the how. It's this incredible, almost magical mechanism that takes those invisible waves of information from the field of consciousness and skillfully transforms them into the rich music of our thoughts, our perceptions, and even the very words we use to describe our experience.
Now, this whole process of modulation really relies on two key skills. First, you've got resonance. This is how we naturally, almost automatically, lock onto frequencies that match our existing beliefs, our emotional state, our memories. The second skill, which is just as important, is differentiation. This is our mind's ability to tell one signal from another, to see the edges. Without it, everything would just be a big, jumbled mess of noise.
So, what does it look like when this all works in perfect harmony? When our resonance and differentiation are perfectly balanced? Well, we achieve a state that the source calls coherence. This is what it means to receive a perfect, crystal clear signal from reality.
And in this ideal state, the mind isn't a flawed filter that's blocking information anymore. No, it becomes a clear prism. It doesn't obstruct the pure white light of consciousness. Instead, it beautifully refracts it into a full, vibrant spectrum of understanding without any distortion whatsoever.
And the contrast here is just stark. On one side, balanced modulation gives us clarity, mental flexibility, a real sense of flow. But when it gets unbalanced, that signal gets corrupted. Clarity dissolves into confusion, fluid understanding hardens into obsessive fixation, and our mental state just descends into what the source calls informational turbulence, which is a great way to describe that feeling of internal chaos. So that brings us to a really critical question. What causes this to get so unbalanced in the first place? Why does our signal distort? And where do these deep patterns of cognitive dysfunction actually come from? Well, the root cause is a fundamental misalignment. Dysfunction starts the moment our personal thought patterns, the station we're fixated on, fall out of sync with the broader, more harmonious flow of consciousness. It's exactly like being caught right between two radio stations. The signal you get is just weak, staticky, and totally incoherent.
And this incoherence, this mental static, it shows up in two main ways. The first is rigidity, which is like having the radio dial jammed on a single station, and you can't change it even if the broadcast is just awful. The second is fragmentation, where the dial is just spinning wildly, picking up these chaotic, disconnected snippets of signals that never form a complete song.
So let's take a closer look at these two kinds of static, because they describe two very different ways our signal can break down. And it's worth asking yourself, is your dial stuck, or is it spinning out of control?
So first up, we have rigidity. This is when the mind gets locked into a repetitive loop. It becomes defensive and completely closed off to any new information that challenges its established worldview. It's basically the mind saying, nope, I will only listen to this one station and everything else is wrong. The dial is just plain stuck.
Psychologically, this looks like what you'd expect: dogmatism, stubborn inflexibility, a really strong confirmation bias. But energetically, it's described as low-frequency entrenchment. What that means is the mind's energy has become so dense and slow that it literally can't vibrate in harmony with new, more expansive ideas. It's just too heavy to tune in to a higher frequency.
Now, on the complete other side of the coin, we have fragmentation. Here, the problem isn't being stuck, it's being scattered everywhere at once. Cognition becomes chaotic, inconsistent, and, this is crucial, it gets disconnected from the wisdom of our emotions and our intuition. Here, the dial is just spinning completely out of control.
This tends to show up as that feeling of dissociation or chronic confusion or that anxious rumination where your thoughts just spin in these unproductive, chaotic circles. The energetic state here is called frequency incoherence. Instead of being stuck at one low frequency, the mind is trying to vibrate in multiple, conflicting directions all at the same time, which just creates pure internal noise.
And here is the key insight. Whether the mind is rigid and stuck or fragmented and spinning, both of those paths ultimately lead to the exact same destination, a pretty painful state called energetic dissonance. This is a fundamental disharmony between our thoughts, our emotions, and our body. Put simply, everything is out of tune.
And this isn't some abstract, out there concept. We all know this feeling intimately. The most common psychological term for it is cognitive dissonance, that deeply uncomfortable, stressful feeling you get when you hold two contradictory beliefs at once, or when your actions just don't align with your deepest values. That feeling is the sound of your internal frequencies clashing.
Okay, so if we find ourselves lost in all this painful static, how do we get back to a clear signal? This brings us to our final and maybe the most important section. How do we consciously and intentionally get back to our own cognitive coherence?
Well, when we feel that dissonance, our consciousness naturally tries to resolve it. We might adjust our beliefs to fit our actions. Sometimes we might just repress the conflict and pretend it's not there. But the most powerful and transformative path is that third one, realigning our energetic flow through higher integration, which is a fancy way of saying we actively and consciously choose to tune into a more coherent, more truthful frequency.
This quote really says it all. Healing our mind isn't about fighting our thoughts. It's about intentionally restoring that coherence from the inside out. It's about consciously retuning our own internal radio to align our thoughts with what's true, our emotions with understanding, and our personal energy with the vast flow of consciousness itself.
The ultimate destination of this whole retuning journey is a state the Source calls gnosis. And this isn't just about thinking better. It's a state of direct, holistic knowing that goes way beyond concepts. I mean, imagine the difference between reading a detailed description of a beautiful song and actually hearing the music fill the room. That massive leap from description to direct experience, that's gnosis.
In this state of gnosis, the mind is no longer a faulty radio that's struggling with static. It becomes a luminous bridge. Cognition perfectly serves consciousness, allowing us to experience existence not as a series of random, broken events, but as a single, unbroken, and deeply meaningful flow. The signal is finally perfectly clear.
You know, this journey from the static of rigidity and fragmentation all the way to the clarity of coherence is really the great journey of consciousness itself. If you'd like to explore these powerful ideas in greater depth, you can reach out for more information using the contact details provided in the description box below. Thank you for tuning in.